When my family kicked me into the dusty old shed to make space for my brother's pregnant girlfriend, they thought I'd just take it, but I didn't cry or beg. I vanished without a word, and what followed was a slow unraveling of every lie, every betrayal they built their comfort on. My name's Mason, I'm 31 years old, been working full-time since I was 17. I'm the type of guy who keeps my head down, helps where I can, doesn't talk too much unless someone asks me something directly. I've lived with my family in this 2-bedroom fixer-upper out in Ashford, Tennessee. My dad's 65 and retired early after he messed up his back doing factory work for 20 years. He's gruff, mostly quiet unless he's watching a ball game, and my younger brother Ricky, he's 26, charming in that lazy kind of way, works when he has to but always finds a way to make someone else pick up the slack. My mom, she passed away 6 years ago, cancer, real fast, real cruel, and ever since then it's been the three of us, me doing most of the repairs around the house, handling the bills when dad's pension wasn't enough, driving Ricky to his gigs when his car was down, basically the one everyone leaned on but no one really looked at, until Carly showed up. Carly's 22, pretty, loud, always talking like she's starring in some reality show. She's Ricky's girlfriend or maybe fiancé, who knows anymore. They fight and make up like it's a sport, and when she got pregnant, everything changed. It wasn't like I didn't care. I mean, a baby's a big deal, but suddenly the whole house revolved around her. She moved in before the first ultrasound, started leaving her clothes in the dryer, her makeup on the bathroom sink, her snacks all over the kitchen, like she owned the place. And then one evening, I come home from a double shift at the shop, and Dad's sitting at the kitchen table with Ricky and Carly, looking real serious, like someone died, and they tell me straight up, "We're going to need your room. Carly's getting bigger, she needs space and privacy, and we can't exactly have her sleeping on the couch now, can we?" And I swear I just stood there, still holding my lunchbox, blinking like I hadn't heard right, like maybe they were joking, but Ricky leans back in his chair, arms crossed, like he's waiting for me to argue, and Dad won't meet my eyes, and Carly's smiling like she's already won, and that's when they dropped the next part. We cleared out the old shed behind the house, threw in a mattress and space heater. It's temporary, they say, just until the baby comes, just until we get everything sorted, like it was some favor they were doing me, some noble gesture to keep me under their roof. But that shed, it's not insulated, it leaks when it rains, the floor's warped, there's spiders the size of my fist in the corners, and it used to be where we stored broken furniture and old tools. I used to fix bikes in there when I was a kid, and now they want me to sleep there like I'm some afterthought. And the worst part, I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't call them selfish or cruel even though every fiber of me wanted to. I just nodded, went to my room, started packing my things into a duffel, real slow, because something in me had clicked off, like a switch had flipped, and I realized they never saw me as anything but convenient, just useful enough to keep around until I wasn't. And as I zipped that bag up, I looked around at the walls I'd painted, the ceiling I'd fixed after a storm tore it open, the shelves I'd built with my own 2 hands, and I knew, this wasn't home anymore. It was just a place I'd helped maintain for people who didn't value me. So I moved into the shed that night, didn't say much, just a polite thanks when Dad handed me a flashlight and an extension cord. I laid on the thin mattress that sagged in the middle, listened to the crickets outside and the muffled TV through the walls of the house, and I started thinking, not about revenge, not yet, but about peace, about what it would mean to stop holding this family up like scaffolding, to let them feel what it's like when the one who keeps things running suddenly disappears. And over the next few days I kept to myself, went to work, came back, stayed in the shed. Only entered the house to grab food or use the bathroom. I watched them act like nothing was wrong, Carly waddling around in her slippers, Ricky playing video games in my old room, Dad grumbling about the electric bill like he didn't just push his own son into a glorified tool closet. And that's when I started making a plan, not dramatic or loud, just something quiet and smart. I started pulling some cash out of every paycheck, just 50 here and there, enough to not raise questions. I started looking online during my breaks, checking out small towns a few hours away, towns where rent was cheap, where no one knew my name, where I could start over without anyone asking where I came from. And one night, maybe 2 weeks after I moved into the shed, it was raining hard, thunder shaking the ground, and I could hear Carly yelling at Ricky through the walls of the house, something about takeout or who forgot to buy milk. And I laid there, damp from a leak dripping on my shoulder, and I knew I wasn't just ready to go, I was ready to disappear, not forever maybe, but long enough that they'd feel the void, and maybe, just maybe, learn what it meant to lose someone who never asked for much but gave everything. So the next morning, I went to work like normal, left a note in the shed that just said, "I'm fine, don't come looking," and then I was gone, not to a big city or across the country, just far enough that they wouldn't think to look, far enough that I could breathe again, and back. In Ashford, back in that house, the cracks were already starting to show, but they wouldn't really feel it until later, until they needed something fixed, something paid for, something cleaned or cooked or handled, and I wasn't there, and the real storm, the one that would shake everything they thought was solid, was just beginning to form on the horizon. I didn't go far at first, just 3 towns over to a little place called Millbridge, population maybe 9,000 if you counted the stray dogs and busted lawnmowers. I found a room for rent above a hardware store, real basic, small window, creaky floors, but clean and quiet, and most importantly, mine. The old man who owned the shop didn't ask questions, just handed me the key after I gave him the first month's rent in cash and told him I'd help out around the store on weekends if he needed. I told him my name was Jason, not Mason, just in case anyone came sniffing around, not that I thought they would, but still, better safe than sorry. I didn't bring much with me, just a bag of clothes, my tools, a notebook I used to scribble ideas in when I couldn't sleep, and a photo of my mom from when I was a kid. She's sitting on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and this tired but peaceful look on her face. I kept it tucked between the pages of the notebook, like some kind of quiet reminder of who I was before everything got tangled. I got a job the day after I landed in Millbridge, fixing fences for a cattle farmer who'd lost his regular guy to a divorce and a move to Florida. The work was hard but honest, the kind of labor that leaves your hands sore and your back aching in a good way, like you actually did something with your day. And every evening I'd go back to my little room, cook some scrambled eggs or canned soup, and sit by the window watching the street lamps flicker on. It was boring in the best way, and for a while I thought maybe this was it. Maybe this quiet, anonymous life was all I needed. But back in Ashford, the silence I left behind started making noise. It began with a phone call from my dad. I didn't answer, of course, but I listened to the voicemail, his voice stiff and unsure, like he wasn't used to asking for anything. Just said, "Hey, hope you're okay, give us a call sometime." Real awkward, real short, like he thought maybe I was just out blowing off steam. Then a week later, another message, this one from Ricky, full of fake casual energy, like, "Hey man, just checking in, Carly's asking if you're coming back soon, things are kind of crazy right now, let us know what's up." And I could almost hear the tension under his words, like maybe things weren't as easy as he thought they'd be once I was out of the way. And I'll admit, I replayed that message a few times, not out of guilt but curiosity, wondering how long they could go pretending they didn't need me. The third message came from a number I didn't recognize, but I picked up anyway because I was standing outside the hardware store eating a sandwich and didn't think twice, and it was Carly, her voice brittle, trying to sound calm but clearly fraying at the edges. She said something like, "Listen Mason, I know you're upset, but Ricky's been working late and your dad's not doing great and the baby's almost here and we really could use some help." And I just stood there, chewing my sandwich while she talked, not saying a word, not agreeing to anything, and eventually she gave up and hung up, didn't leave another message after that, and I thought that would be the end of it. But then old Mr. Langley, the hardware store guy, called me downstairs one afternoon and said some girl was in town asking about me, short red hair, about 8 months pregnant, said her name was Carly but looked like she was lying through her teeth. I don't know how she found the town, maybe she saw the charge from the gas station I used on my way out or recognized something in the background of a photo I accidentally posted to an old account. Either way, she was there, and I knew I had to move again, not because I was scared of her, but because I didn't want that poison touching my new life. So I packed up that night, left a thank you note for Langley and $60 in cash on the counter for rent I hadn't used, and took the first bus north to a little river town called Hollowford. I found a trailer out near the woods, rented from a woman named Mrs. D who didn't ask a single question as long as I paid on time and didn't mess with her cat who liked to nap under the porch. And I settled in again, changed my name again, got a new job helping an old mechanic who needed someone with a strong back and no complaints, and I started building a routine, mornings fixing engines, evenings walking by the river, weekends watching the stars with a beer in silence so thick it felt like medicine. And that's when the dreams started, not nightmares exactly, but memories twisted in weird ways, like one where Ricky was holding the baby but it looked like me as a kid, crying and reaching for someone who wasn't there, or one where I walked back into the house and no one could see me, just talked around me like I was a ghost, and I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, and for the first time I started wondering not if I did the right thing, but if I'd let them off too easy. Because while I was rebuilding my life from scratch, they were still living in that house I paid to keep standing, sleeping in the bed I built, using the water heater I installed, all without me, all like I was never there. And I started thinking maybe it was time to do something about that, not out of spite, but out of principle, like setting a broken bone so it could heal right. So I started writing again, not notes or letters, but a journal of everything that happened, all the ways they used me, twisted things, ignored me, made me feel like a burden in my own home, and I started mailing pieces of it anonymously to the house, one every few weeks, typed with no return address, just plain envelopes that probably made Carly paranoid and made Ricky squirm and made Dad stare at the wall in silence. And the reason I know it worked is because one night, almost 5 months after I vanished, I got a call from a blocked number, and when I answered, Ricky's voice came through, shaking, angry, scared, asking who the hell was sending this stuff. What kind of sick game was this? And I just said wrong number and hung up. But man, I smiled for the first time in weeks, not because I wanted them to suffer, but because for the first time, they were forced to remember me the way I actually was, not just the silent helper or the guy in the background, but the one who saw everything, remembered everything, and had finally found a way to speak. After that call, I didn't hear from Ricky again for a while, and honestly I didn't expect to. He was never the kind of guy to deal with discomfort for too long. He'd rather shove it in a closet and forget about it until it leaked out all over the floor. But I kept writing, each letter more personal, more detailed, sometimes just a memory. Like the time I fixed his car in the middle of winter so he could take Carly out on their first date, and he didn't even bother to say thanks. Or when Dad got the flu so bad he couldn't get out of bed and I sat by him feeding him soup and wiping his forehead while Ricky was at some bar watching the playoffs. Or when Mom was still alive and I was 15 and stayed up all night helping her sort bills while Ricky was out pretending to be asleep because he didn't want to get involved. I wasn't trying to twist the knife, I was just showing the truth, piece by piece. Like holding up a mirror they couldn't avoid anymore. I sent 12 letters in total. Each one spaced out just enough that they'd forget the sting before the next one landed. And then I stopped, not because I ran out of things to say but because I felt lighter, like I'd finally unpacked the weight they'd left sitting on my chest for years. Hollowford was quiet during all that, just how I liked it. The river froze over by early January. The mechanic I worked with went south for a month to visit his daughter, so I had some time off, and I used it to fix up the trailer a bit. Patched the roof, sanded the kitchen cabinets, painted the walls the soft green that reminded me of pine needles after it rains, and I'd sit at night with a cup of coffee and just breathe, something I didn't realize I'd forgotten how to do until I was out of that house, out of that shed, out of that life. But even peace can get lonely if you sit in it too long, and I found myself walking into town more often, grabbing a coffee at the little diner even if I wasn't hungry, just to hear someone else's voice. And that's where I met Elsie. She was maybe 40 or so, ran the counter like a captain at sea, sharp tongue, warm eyes, wore a bandana over her curls and called everyone sugar whether she liked you or not. We talked in little bursts at first, her asking what brought me to Hollowford, me giving vague answers about needing a change. She didn't push, just smiled and topped off my cup. But after a few weeks she started sitting with me when things were slow, sharing stories about her grandkids and the stray cat she rescued from the gas station. And one day she brought me a pie she'd made herself, said it was too much for her to eat alone, and I swear, that pie cracked something open in me, not just because it tasted like every holiday I ever wanted but because it reminded me that people can be kind without a reason, generous without an angle, and that maybe not everyone in the world would use me up and toss me aside. And over the next few months we built something small but good, coffee every Tuesday and Friday, long walks on Sundays by the river. And she never pried, never asked me to explain the sadness she could see in my eyes sometimes, just sat next to me and let me be whatever I was in that moment. And for a while I let myself believe I could stay in Hollowford forever, maybe open a small shop or buy a boat or adopt a dog, but nothing gold stays untouched. And one afternoon I came back to the trailer and found a letter taped to the door, no name, just my real name written in thick marker, Mason, not Jason like I told everyone here, and my stomach dropped because I knew that handwriting. It was Carly's, and for a second I almost ripped it up without reading it, almost walked it straight to the fire pit out back and tossed it in, but something in me said read it, so I did, and it wasn't what I expected. It was messy, full of crossed out words and tear stains, but it wasn't angry, it wasn't blaming, it was more like a confession. She wrote about how hard things got after I left, how the house fell apart, pipes leaking, fridge broke, Ricky couldn't fix anything and kept promising he would but never did, how Dad's health got worse, how the baby came early and they were terrified and alone and she cried in the hallway at 3 a.m. because the crib wouldn't fit through the door and no one had helped her build it, how she started to see all the little things I did that they took for granted, how the house was never really a home, not without me there. And then she wrote something I didn't expect. She said she was sorry, not just for the shed, but for the way they all treated me for years. Said she didn't see it before, but now she saw it clear as day, that I was the glue, the spine, the one who showed up even when no one asked, and she ended it with "Please come home, not because we need you but because we miss you." And I sat on the steps holding that letter for a long time, watching the wind shake the trees, and I didn't know what to do. Part of me felt vindicated, part of me wanted to rip it in half, part of me wanted to call her and scream, and part of me wanted to hug her, because yeah, I'd wanted to hear those words for years, but now that they were here, I didn't know if they were too late. I didn't sleep that night, just stared at the ceiling thinking about Mom, about how she'd always say family isn't who shares your blood but who shows up when it matters, and I wondered if this was them showing up, even if it was messy and late. And the next morning I did something I hadn't done in almost a year. I packed a bag, not everything, just a few things, enough for a visit, and I started driving toward Ashford, not because I forgave them, not because I was ready to move back, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes, needed to know if they'd really changed, or if this was just another trick to pull me back in. The drive back to Ashford felt longer than I remembered, not because of the miles but because every turn brought back something I hadn't thought about in months. The gas station where Ricky and I used to buy slushies and scratch-offs like idiots. The overpass where Dad once pulled over and taught me how to change a tire in the dark with just the flashlight from his old flip phone. The diner Mom used to take us to when report cards came in and she wanted to celebrate even the smallest victories. It all came rushing back like some old movie I didn't want to rewatch but couldn't turn off. I didn't call ahead, didn't text or warn anyone, just pulled into the driveway one afternoon in early spring. The grass overgrown, the mailbox hanging by one screw, the place looking somehow smaller than I remembered, and I just sat in the car for a while, gripping the wheel, staring at the house I used to fix and clean and hold together like my name was stitched into the foundation. I finally stepped out and knocked, not even sure who I expected to answer, and it was Ricky, but not the Ricky I remembered. This Ricky looked tired, like sleep hadn't visited him in weeks, hair a mess, shirt stained, baby spit on one shoulder, and when he saw me, his face did this weird thing where it twisted like he wanted to cry and laugh and apologize all at once, but instead he just opened the door wider and said, "Come in, man," real soft, like he wasn't sure if I would. The house smelled different, not bad exactly but not right either, like takeout and diapers and something burnt clinging to the air, and it hit me just how much I used to do without even thinking about it. I walked in slow, like the floor might fall out from under me, and there was Carly, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, and I don't know what I expected from her either, but she just looked at me, eyes already watery, and said, "His name's Eli, and he has your eyes." And I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded and looked down at the kid who blinked up at me like he didn't know whether to trust me or not, and in that moment everything got really quiet, like the house was holding its breath. And then Dad came into the room, leaning heavy on a cane I didn't recognize, and when he saw me he didn't say anything at first, just stared like I was some ghost from a better time, and finally he said, "I was wrong, Mason, I was so damn wrong," and his voice cracked on the last word, and I think that's when I knew this wasn't some trick or ploy. This was real. They were wrecked, not just from missing me but from trying to live without me and realizing just how much they'd broken. We sat around the living room like strangers at a funeral, each one of us waiting for someone else to start, and finally I said, "Why now? Why not before the shed, before the letters, before I left?" And Ricky said, "Because we didn't see it, man. We were so used to you handling everything, we didn't even realize how much you carried until you were gone and everything started falling apart." And Carly nodded and said, "I thought you were just quiet, I didn't know you were holding us all together." And Dad just sat there looking at the floor like he couldn't even forgive himself enough to speak again, and I wanted to be angry. Part of me was screaming, "You don't get to just say sorry and expect it all to be okay," but another part of me, the bigger part, the exhausted part, just wanted peace, and I said, "I'm not moving back, not now. Maybe not ever, but I needed to see if you meant it, and I believe you do. And that's something." And Carly stood up and said, "Will you hold him?" meaning Eli, and I hesitated but nodded, and she placed him in my arms, and for the first time in months something warm and heavy settled into my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe a start. And we sat there for a while, the baby dozing off on my shoulder, the air finally settling, and then I stood up and said, "I'm staying at a motel in town for a few days, don't push it, let me breathe." And Ricky nodded like he understood. And I walked out feeling like I'd done the hardest thing I'd ever do, not leaving, but coming back. And over the next few days they didn't push, didn't call, or drop by, just gave me space like I asked, and I used the time to walk old roads, sit in the park, remember who I was before they forgot me, and I thought about what I wanted next, not what they wanted, not what I owed, but what I needed to be okay, and the Truth is, I didn't want to erase them, I just wanted balance, respect, a voice at the table, and maybe we were on the road to that, slow and bumpy but real. And on the last night before I planned to head back to Hollowford, I got a text from Carly that just said thank you for holding him, it meant more than you know, and I stared at that message for a long time and typed back one word, you're welcome, and that was it. Not a big reunion, not a movie ending, just a quiet shift in the wind, and I packed my bag again, not with sadness this time but with choice, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving because I was pushed out, I was leaving on my own terms, with my head up, my spine straight, and the path ahead wide open. I drove back to Hollowford before the sun came up, road still slick from the rain that had passed through the night before, sky starting to blush with that soft early light that makes everything feel like a new page. I didn't blast music or talk to myself like I used to on long drives, just kept my hands steady on the wheel and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket. It wasn't sad anymore, it wasn't heavy, it just was, like the weight had shifted from my shoulders into the ground where it belonged. When I pulled up to the trailer, I sat in the car for a second, looking at it with new eyes, not like some hideaway or exile anymore, but like a real home, my space, something I chose, and that made all the difference. Mrs. D waved at me from her porch, her cat curled up on a chair beside her like it hadn't moved in days, and I gave a small wave back, carried my bag inside, set it down gently like I wasn't running anymore, and that same afternoon I walked into the diner and Elsie nearly dropped a coffee pot when she saw me, called me a damn ghost and swatted my arm before pulling me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and fryer grease, and I let her hug me longer than usual because I needed it, because it reminded me that I had roots here too, even if they were just starting to grow. I told her a little about the trip, not everything, just enough for her to know I'd gone back to tie off a loose thread and didn't let it strangle me. She nodded, didn't push, just refilled my cup and told me I better not vanish again without saying goodbye next time, and I smiled and told her I wouldn't, and I meant it. Life in Hollowford didn't change much after that. The river still flowed slow and steady, the diner still smelled like bacon and burnt toast, the mechanic still cursed like a sailor and paid me under the table with greasy bills and strong black coffee, but something inside me had shifted, like I finally let myself believe I deserved this peace, not as a reward for suffering, but just because I was a person who mattered. And sometimes I'd still think about Ashford, about Dad shuffling through the kitchen with his cane, about Ricky fumbling with a diaper at 3 a.m., about Carly watching me hold her son with wet eyes and a quiet apology hovering between us, and I didn't feel angry or bitter when I thought of them, just a distant kind of ache, like a healed scar that still tingles when the weather turns cold. And then one day in early summer, I got a package in the mail, no return address, just my name, spelled right this time, and inside was a photo of Eli, smiling big with two tiny teeth showing, wearing a onesie that said world's best nephew, and underneath it was a handwritten note from Ricky that just said he still talks about you like you never left. And man, I sat on that step with that photo in my hand and felt something in me loosen, not break, not fall apart, just loosen, like maybe the door I thought I slammed shut wasn't locked after all, just closed for now. And I still didn't plan to move back or change my name again or start over again. I was done running, done hiding, but I didn't hate them anymore, and maybe that was the biggest win of all. And a few months later, on a quiet evening with fireflies flickering outside and the smell of honeysuckle creeping through the window, I sat at my little desk and opened that old notebook again, the one I carried from town to town, page to page, and I wrote something new, not a letter this time, not a list of all the ways I'd been wronged, but a story, my story, about a man who was pushed out, forced into the cold, forgotten by his own family, and how he disappeared not to hurt them but to save himself, and how in that silence, in that vanishing, the world shifted just enough for something better to grow. And when I finished writing it, I didn't cry, didn't pace or drink or stare out the window. I just closed the notebook and breathed, and it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. And maybe one day I'll share that story, maybe I'll send it to Ricky or read it to Eli when he's old enough to understand that sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do, or maybe I'll keep it tucked away, a quiet reminder that even when they try to put you in a shed, in the shadows, you can still rise, still rebuild, still find your own light. And as the stars came out that night and the crickets started their soft summer song, I stood outside, barefoot in the grass, looked up at the sky and whispered thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to myself, to the universe, to the part of me that didn't give up when it would have been so easy to disappear forever, because in the end, I didn't vanish, not really, I just finally showed up for myself. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more crazy twists. See you in the next one.